Imagine the dark and turbulent skies over Normandy in June of 1944. Thousands of young men are stepping out of perfectly good airplanes, plunging into the freezing, chaotic air above occupied Europe. Their lives, and perhaps the very fate of the free world, depend entirely on massive canopies billowing open in the pitch-black night above them. For centuries, such a daring leap would have required vast quantities of silk, a delicate and expensive material monopolized by the very Axis powers these Allied soldiers were currently fighting. But the canopies saving these paratroopers were not made of silk. They were woven from a completely artificial substance, a chemical miracle conjured from coal, air, and water just a few short years earlier. You have probably been told that this remarkable substance was invented merely to make elegant stockings, a frivolous fashion accessory that once caused literal riots in department stores across America. But that popular narrative is only a fraction of the true story. The material you know as nylon was born in a laboratory of pure, obsessive scientific exploration, and it rapidly evolved into one of the most critical strategic assets of the Second World War. What began as a sticky, frustrating mess in a glass beaker ultimately redefined modern warfare, abruptly altering global supply chains and violently ushering in the age of synthetics. To understand how a simple, manufactured thread could literally change the course of human history and save countless lives in the theater of war, we have to rewind to a time when powerful empires were built and sustained on the backs of a tiny, unassuming insect. For thousands of years, the world was completely captivated by the silkworm. The shimmering, incredibly strong fibers spun by this creature had built trade routes that connected continents, shaped entire economies, and clothed the elite of every major civilization. By the 1920s and 30s, silk was still the undisputed king of luxury fabrics, but it was also a vital industrial and military material. It was used in everything from surgical sutures to the delicate fabric covering the wings of early aircraft, and most importantly, it was the only material reliable enough to be used for parachutes. The problem for the Western world, and particularly for the United States, was that the vast majority of the global silk supply was controlled by the Empire of Japan. Every single time an American consumer bought a pair of silk stockings or the military purchased parachutes for its growing aviation programs, American dollars were flowing directly into the rapidly militarizing Japanese economy. Business leaders and military strategists alike recognized this massive vulnerability. They knew that if tensions in the Pacific ever reached a boiling point, the supply of silk would be instantly severed, leaving the United States entirely crippled in both its domestic fashion markets and its crucial military aviation sectors. The race was on to find a substitute, but nobody was looking for a cheap imitation. They needed something that possessed the strength, the elasticity, and the sheer durability of silk, but that could be manufactured reliably in a factory on American soil. The solution to this geopolitical nightmare would not come from an agricultural breakthrough or a new trade deal, but from a quiet, deeply troubled genius working in a newly constructed laboratory in Delaware. The question was, who was bold enough to fund a scientific wild goose chase that had no guarantee of ever turning a profit? That monumental gamble was taken by the DuPont Chemical Company, a corporation that had previously made its fortune primarily in explosives during the First World War. Seeking to change its public image and diversify its business, DuPont decided to do something completely unprecedented in the corporate world. They established an experimental laboratory dedicated entirely to pure science. Unlike applied research, where scientists are tasked with solving a specific commercial problem, pure science meant the researchers were given enormous budgets and told to simply explore the fundamental mysteries of nature, with the vague hope that their discoveries might eventually lead to something profitable. To lead this ambitious new venture, DuPont recruited Wallace Carothers, a brilliant but remarkably eccentric chemistry instructor from Harvard University. Carothers was not a businessman. He was a deeply introverted intellectual who suffered from severe bouts of depression and often carried a small capsule of cyanide in his pocket, haunted by his own inner demons. But in the laboratory, his mind was unparalleled. He was utterly fascinated by a concept that many established scientists of the time still considered highly controversial, which was the idea of polymers. Carothers believed that it was possible to take small, simple molecules and coax them into linking together to form giant, endlessly repeating chains, much like linking paper clips together to form a miles-long necklace. If he could control this process, he theorized, he could create entirely new materials that did not exist anywhere in the natural world. He assembled a team of young, brilliant chemists and began to mix, heat, and distill highly volatile compounds, hoping to force nature to bend to his mathematical theories. But creating a giant molecule in a flask is one thing. Creating one that is actually useful is an entirely different, incredibly frustrating puzzle. For months and years, their experiments yielded nothing but useless, foul-smelling sludges and brittle resins that shattered at the slightest touch. The pure science approach seemed to be a spectacular, extremely expensive failure, and the pressure from the corporate executives was beginning to mount. The breakthrough that would change the world happened almost by accident on a routine morning in 1930. One of Carothers' assistants, a chemist named Julian Hill, was playing around with a newly synthesized batch of a polyester compound. He noticed that the substance in the beaker had a strange, incredibly sticky consistency. Out of pure curiosity, he dipped a glass stirring rod into the warm, molasses-like liquid and slowly pulled it away. To his absolute astonishment, the liquid did not simply break or drip. Instead, it stretched out into a long, continuous, incredibly thin fiber. As the fiber hit the cool air of the laboratory, it immediately solidified. Hill called his colleagues over, and they began running down the hallway of the laboratory, pulling the glowing thread longer and longer, marveling at its strange properties. They had inadvertently created a synthetic fiber, but there was a massive catch. This initial polyester had a very low melting point. If you put it in hot water, it would simply dissolve back into a gooey mess, making it entirely useless for clothing or industrial applications. But the fundamental proof of concept had been established. Carothers knew that the paperclip chain of molecules could indeed be stretched and aligned to form a fiber. He simply needed to find the exact right chemical building blocks to make a chain that was strong, resilient, and resistant to heat. He abandoned the polyesters and turned his attention to a different class of chemicals called polyamides, embarking on a grueling, multi-year process of trial and error. The chemical mixtures were incredibly complex, the reactions were dangerous, and Carothers' mental health was steadily deteriorating under the immense pressure to deliver a usable product. Yet, he pushed forward, driven by a scientific obsession to unlock the secrets of synthetic structure. Would his brilliant mind hold together long enough to finalize the greatest chemical invention of the 20th century? In February of 1935, the laboratory finally produced the exact chemical miracle they had been desperately seeking. The substance, internally designated as polymer 6,6, was tough, highly elastic, completely resistant to water, and possessed a melting point high enough to withstand boiling and ironing. When extruded through tiny spinnerets, it formed a thread that was famously described as being as strong as steel, but as fine as a spider's web. DuPont knew immediately that they had just revolutionized the textile industry, and they poured millions of dollars into developing the manufacturing infrastructure required to mass-produce this incredible new material. They needed a catchy name, something that sounded modern and rolled easily off the tongue. After rejecting hundreds of suggestions, they settled on the word nylon. The public debut of this synthetic marvel was carefully orchestrated for maximum impact at the 1939 New York World's Fair, an event dedicated to the wonders of the future. The star attraction was not flying cars or robotic servants, but a giant, mechanical pair of female legs modeling sheer stockings made from the new wonder fiber. The impact was instantaneous and utterly explosive. Women across the country had been suffering for years with silk stockings that were incredibly expensive, prone to constant running, and difficult to wash. Nylon promised elegance, durability, and affordability. When the stockings finally went on national sale in May of 1940, it was an event unlike anything the retail world had ever witnessed. Department stores were completely mobbed by thousands of frantic women, entirely selling out of their massive inventories within a matter of hours. In that first year alone, DuPont sold an astonishing 64 million pairs of nylon stockings. The material was universally hailed as a triumph of modern capitalism and a definitive end to the irritating problems of everyday fashion. But this cultural phenomenon, this joyful celebration of synthetic beauty, was about to be abruptly and violently interrupted by the darkest chapter in human history. On December the 7th, 1941, the Empire of Japan attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, immediately plunging the United States into the massive global conflict of the Second World War. Just as military strategists had feared for decades, the vital supply lines across the Pacific were instantly severed. The United States found itself cut off from 90% of the world's raw silk supply overnight. This was not a fashion crisis, it was a devastating strategic emergency. The rapidly expanding American military desperately needed massive quantities of parachutes, tow ropes, and specialized textiles to fight a war on two distant fronts. The government immediately took drastic action, seizing the entirety of the nation's remaining silk reserves. But it was nowhere near enough. The military turned their desperate gaze toward the newly built factories of the DuPont Corporation. Almost overnight, nylon stockings completely vanished from the shelves of American department stores. The public was informed that every single ounce of the synthetic wonder fiber was being drafted into military service. Women were asked to patriotically donate their used, run-down nylons to recycling drives, and many resorted to using liquid leg makeup, painting dark seams down the backs of their calves to simulate the look of the vanished stockings. Meanwhile, behind the heavily guarded walls of the chemical plants, production shifted into unimaginable overdrive. The chemical formula that had been perfected to make legs look beautiful was suddenly the absolute key to keeping Allied pilots and paratroopers alive. The transition from peacetime luxury to wartime necessity was fraught with technical challenges. Making a stocking is relatively simple, but constructing a parachute that can safely arrest the fall of a heavily armed soldier jumping from a speeding aircraft requires absolute engineering perfection. Could this brand new, relatively untested synthetic material truly replace a natural fiber that had proven itself over thousands of years? The rigorous military testing of nylon parachutes revealed something truly astonishing. Not only was the synthetic material an adequate substitute for Japanese silk, it was actually vastly superior in almost every conceivable metric. Silk parachutes had a fatal flaw in the humid, tropical environments of the Pacific Theater. They were highly susceptible to mold and mildew. If a silk parachute was packed damp or stored in a humid jungle bunker, the microscopic fungi would rapidly consume the organic fibers, completely compromising the structural integrity of the canopy. A pilot forced to bail out might pull the ripcord, only to have the rotted silk violently shred into confetti under the immense force of the opening shock. Nylon, however, was completely inorganic. It was entirely impervious to mold, mildew, insects, and rot. A nylon parachute could be packed wet, left in a sweltering jungle for months, and it would deploy perfectly every single time. Furthermore, nylon possessed a unique property of elasticity that silk simply could not match. When a paratrooper leaped from an aircraft, the sudden opening of the canopy generated a massive, jarring deceleration force that could easily break bones or dislocate shoulders. The nylon fibers, however, acted like microscopic shock absorbers, stretching slightly under the immense tension to smoothly dissipate the kinetic energy before returning to their original shape. This incredibly rapid stretch and recovery made the opening shock significantly less violent for the jumper, greatly reducing the rate of combat injuries. By the time the massive airborne armadas were assembled for the D-Day invasion of Normandy, the skies were filled not with the ancient silk of the Orient, but with hundreds of thousands of gleaming white canopies woven entirely from American coal, air, and water. Nylon was literally saving the lives of the men dropping behind enemy lines. But the military soon realized that the potential of this synthetic miracle extended far beyond just bringing soldiers safely back to Earth. What else could they build with this incredibly tough, lightweight material? As the global war machine ground on, nylon found its way into virtually every single aspect of the Allied logistical and combat operations, quietly replacing heavier, weaker, or scarcer traditional materials. The massive B-29 Superfortress bombers, the most advanced aircraft in the world, required immensely strong tires to withstand the punishing impact of landing on rough, newly carved island airstrips. Traditional cotton or rayon tire cords frequently ruptured under the immense heat and pressure, leading to catastrophic blowouts and the loss of critical aircraft. Nylon cords, with their high heat resistance and incredible tensile strength, solved the problem permanently, allowing the heavy bombers to operate with absolute reliability. In the treacherous jungles of the South Pacific, soldiers were dying not just from enemy fire, but from entirely preventable tropical diseases transmitted by insects. Traditional cotton mosquito netting was heavy, bulky, and rotted incredibly quickly in the damp environment. Nylon was rapidly spun into incredibly fine, lightweight, and completely rot-proof netting that protected troops from malaria-carrying mosquitoes, drastically reducing casualty rates from disease. The material was woven into incredibly tough tow ropes utilized by transport aircraft to pull heavy combat gliders full of troops and equipment directly into active war zones. It was used to create lightweight, water-resistant tents that did not grow heavy with absorbed rain. It was even utilized to create incredibly fine filters for processing life-saving blood plasma on the front lines. By the time the war finally came to a grinding halt in 1945, the United States military was consuming tens of millions of pounds of nylon every single year. The material had definitively proven itself in the most demanding, violent laboratory imaginable. It had successfully completely decoupled the American war machine from its heavy reliance on foreign natural resources. But as the guns fell silent and millions of victorious soldiers began the long journey home, a new, completely unexpected conflict was about to erupt on the streets of American cities. The abrupt end of the Second World War meant that the vast manufacturing capacity of the DuPont Corporation could finally be redirected away from parachutes and tow ropes and back toward the incredibly lucrative consumer market. The women of America had patiently gone without their beloved nylon stockings for over 3 long, difficult years, and their pent-up demand had reached absolutely staggering proportions. When department stores cautiously announced that nylons would finally be returning to their shelves in the fall of 1945, they severely underestimated the sheer desperation of the public. What followed became famously known in the press as the Nylon Riots. In major cities across the entire country, massive, unruly crowds of thousands of women violently pushed, shoved, and trampled each other to get their hands on the incredibly limited supply of the sheer stockings. In Pittsburgh, an estimated 40,000 people lined up outside a single store, creating a chaotic mob that required immense police intervention to control. The absolute frenzy perfectly illustrated the deep psychological and cultural impact of the synthetic material. It was no longer just a luxury item. It had become a powerful symbol of a return to normalcy, prosperity, and the bright, modern future that had been promised before the dark interruption of the global war. However, the true legacy of nylon extended far beyond the realm of fashion. The successful invention and massive scale production of Wallace Carothers' chemical miracle completely shattered the long-standing boundaries of materials science. It definitively proved to the entire world that humanity was no longer strictly limited by the materials provided by nature. We could manipulate the fundamental molecular building blocks of reality to create customized substances tailored for any conceivable purpose. Nylon was merely the first massive wave in a rapidly rising tide of synthetic innovation. The techniques pioneered in the DuPont laboratories quickly paved the way for the invention of polyester, acrylic, Kevlar, and thousands of other highly specialized plastics and polymers that completely defined the modern world. Today, synthetic fibers account for more than 60% of all the textiles produced globally, influencing everything from the clothes we wear to the complex medical devices implanted in our bodies, and the incredibly advanced composites used to construct modern spacecraft. Yet, amidst this towering legacy of technological triumph, there remains a deep, lingering sense of personal tragedy. Wallace Carothers, the brilliant, tortured mind who first conceptualized and created this world-altering material, did not live to see the immense global impact of his work, nor did he witness its crucial role in winning the Second World War. In April of 1937, entirely overwhelmed by his worsening depression and the immense pressure of his own genius, Carothers checked into a hotel room in Philadelphia and quietly drank a lethal dose of cyanide dissolved in lemon juice. He died believing himself to be a complete failure as a scientist. He could never have imagined that his sticky, frustrating laboratory experiment would one day save the lives of thousands of paratroopers plunging into the darkness over Normandy, or that his mathematical theories would permanently alter the very fabric of human civilization. The true story of nylon is not merely a trivial footnote about women's fashion. It is a profound, deeply complex saga of brilliant, pure science, intense geopolitical conflict, and the incredible, often tragic human cost of true innovation. It stands as a powerful reminder that the most world-changing miracles often begin quietly, hidden in the shadows of a laboratory, waiting for the perfect moment to redefine the boundaries of what is possible. If you found this deep dive into the hidden history of modern warfare fascinating, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because there are countless more incredible stories of scientific mysteries and historical revelations waiting to be uncovered in our upcoming videos.